Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Fired Up. My name's Morgan McLintic. Happy Christmas to you all. And today I am joined by Nicole Pytel.
Hey, Morgan. Hey, everybody.
Ian Lipner.
Hey there.
And Chris Ulbrich.
Hello.
So it's Boxing Day, everyone. So I hope that you've generously given all your servants the day off to be with their families and given them gifts. That's the tradition. St. Stephen apparently was the first martyr, and traditionally now we give all the servants a day off. But anyway, I hope you all had a good Christmas and enjoyed it. And today we thought that what we would do as we come to the end of the year is just take a look at some of the big stories of this year in terms of what really impacted the news and the news agenda, and get a little glimpse into what might be shaping the news for next year and the kind of work that we do in startups. So if we're all ready, let's dive in. And I think, look, the biggest story of the year was obviously Donald Trump winning his second term on November 6th. And regardless of your politics, I think this has massive implications in terms of the kind of policies for tech, in terms of the impact of podcasts. Let's dive in and talk a little bit about this one. Chris, what do you think?
I think from startups' perspective, besides the obvious, just the international implications and the domestic implications, just broadly for the tech industry, what's really distinctive about Trump's victory this time around is how instrumental the Silicon Valley leaders were in that effort. Obviously, Elon Musk, biggest donor in the entire election, played a key role in the victory. And then, of course, we have key figures like Mark Andreessen and Vivek Ramaswamy close to the White House. So I think that we can expect, and this is probably an understatement, but we can expect Silicon Valley's priorities to get a sympathetic hearing in this new administration. So that's going to have big implications for the startup industry. And at the same time, setting the stage for that, here we have another rate cut just announced recently. So interest rates coming down, that tends to correlate with more money flowing into venture capital. We're going to see deregulation of AI, deregulation of crypto. A lot of the big items on Silicon Valley's wish list look like they're going to be top of the agenda for the new administration.
Just broadly, I think there's this sense of, okay, we know what's coming, because I think all year long, everybody was holding off. I don't know what's going to happen in November. I don't want to make big decisions. As we got into Q3, people were just putting decisions off entirely, and startups themselves, the investors behind them. No matter where you fall on the spectrum politically, the uncertainty is over. We know what's coming. We know what happened. And so I think that in and of itself is going to be good for Silicon Valley. I think, yes, we've got the rate cut, but I think also just, okay, let's all get off pause and let's keep moving on. And I think that's ultimately very good for the startup community.
I don't know if I fully agree that the uncertainty is over. I think there's a lot of people with question marks over their head about what next year is going to look like. I agree that the uncertainty of whether we're going to have a peaceful transition of power is over. But there's the potential that, look, we've seen policy be fickle under Trump before. We've seen him speak out in one way while his policymakers are working in another way. So I see a new era of uncertainty. I think we could see more market swings because of a president that's willing to contradict his Fed chair. What happens if he wants to bring interest rates further down and the Fed chair doesn't want that to happen? Certainly, there's a lot of people who would welcome lower interest rates. People in the crypto market would love a weakening dollar. But what would that do to the broader kind of market, a sense of where the market's going? And lower corporate taxes, all these things sound great for business, imply that we should see more business activity going forward. But I do think that because Trump does tend to zig and zag and seems to think that the weave is what makes him attractive, that he'll tend to want to control the news agenda, probably more so than even that economic and political agenda. On the surface of it, it looks like this could be a good year for business. There are those of us who still feel uncertain about what that leadership will bring.
That's a good point. Just day to day, even people within Trump's inner circle will say that the way he operates is to come in every day and just start fresh and watch the news and get fired up about what he sees. And that's the agenda for the day. There's not a lot of long-term planning. Also, the record shows, and people around him will say that he's easily bored. He's going to want to shake things up. And so on a day-to-day level, you're right. What we can say for sure from the experience of the last administration is that it won't be boring because it's a high priority for the president that he control the media cycle. And so there has to be news. There has to be change. Otherwise, without change, there's no news. And without news, it wouldn't be a Trump administration.
So in this little sort of intervening period, though, we're through the uncertainty of who is going to be the next president. We've seen the stock market go up. You saw IPOs are back on, Service Titan went. They did well. As you mentioned, crypto is good. You got David Sachs in there now going to govern some of that, the AI and crypto, czar. So those markets are looking pretty good at the moment. We are seeing renewed confidence amongst startups, people making plans, committing budgets, VC deals closing. So this could just be a little sort of pent-up relief that at least we know the course, even it's going to be uncertain once we're in it. So we could just be in this little intervening part, but we're certainly seeing marketers feel more confident about 2025 now that this decision has been. And no review of 2024's news could really go without the sort of historic second term that Donald Trump has won. Our second story here is, we've just touched on it, but actually is the drop in the Fed rate. And this started on September the 18th. We've just had we just had the third one, a quarter point dip. But that first one back in September, that with the market had been waiting for 5 in the year, we had all been holding out at the top of the market, or rather holding out, I should say, for the bottom of the market, like when interest rates start to come down and sort of signal, it's go time, and that would unlock some of the sort of VC deals. And I think we all felt at that time, end of summer, a big sense of relief. People were concerned that the cut was too big. But I think we saw a fairly short-lived sort of run of enthusiasm around that was quickly sort of enveloped by Biden and then subsumed in the election. So the next wave of uncertainty. But I would say, again, as I think about 2024, coming off the peak of these interest rates and the couple of drops that we've had since then has been sort of critical to the mood and the sort of optimism for 2025. I think they've even said that they're going to have 2 more cuts in 2025.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, lower borrowing costs give startups cheaper capital. It helps them scale faster, compete more aggressively. The tightening cycle ending sort of signals to VCs, hey, it's time to redeploy your cash. Now, maybe the pendulum swings. Okay, wait, fear of missing out might start setting in again. And then the various supports around the fintech market and crypto in particular sort of doubled if the dollar weakens at all as part of that process. And we've seen in the past how an engine in fintech can kind of power the rest of the startup sector, right? Because if we have a way to create more capital flow, and if crypto can open that, it's going to be sort of balanced by, okay, folks are going to go take some of those profits and put them into the other industries besides those that are just looking at fintech innovation. It can be one of those things that can bring the whole VC mood up. And the latest tenor of the conversation, though, is to seemingly lower our expectations for the frequency compared to what we might have imagined prior. So it's still going to create a little bit of tension at each of those announcements. Is this going to be enough? Is this too much? Are they going to pause? Is this because they didn't tell us when about these timings, just sort of the number that they're imagining. So those timings can, I think, create, again, uncertainty points that once the move is made, you start to see the markets cascade and that things start to happen, just like we've seen here near the end of the year.
Right. And classically, we expect with interest rates going down for capital flow into the venture capital sector. I think a big wild card that will be fascinating to see this play out, if it plays out, is there's talk about creating a multi-$100 billion Bitcoin reserve. And I imagine that that's the sort of thing that gets macroeconomists wrangling and arguing about the impact. And I'm certainly no macroeconomist. Just as a layperson, I would think that given that the conventional wisdom is that should that go through, it's just going to automatically boost the fortunes of existing crypto companies and crypto holders. You would think that would imply investment in crypto specifically. A lot of people will be trying to get into on the action. And so that might suggest that while the interest rate cuts will bring capital into venture, it might not be evenly distributed. It might be disproportionately in a couple of areas. We've already seen some of that flowing to AI, though there's some argument about to what extent startups can effectively be pure AI plays. But it's just to say that this may be an instance, depending on what happens with crypto, where an influx of capital doesn't lift all boats.
Our list here doesn't have Bitcoin going over, 100K. And I think other lists might well have done. If there is a strategic reserve of Bitcoin, you could absolutely think about more investment in crypto companies. I think a lot of VCs got burned with Web3 and marketers stayed out of that. We might see renewed interest in those kind of companies, or companies leveraging blockchain again as it sort of becomes more legitimized. I think that's something to watch, but maybe controversially, we didn't include that on our list. Just parenthetically, of course, it's going to create a lot more wealthier people. And there are LPs into the VC firms again. So that could, where you're going to put the money once you've taken it out of crypto. So regardless, the interest rate falling, I think, is just been massive for marketers and startups in general. And we will probably see it continue as long as interest rates can be kept at a reasonable level in 2025. All right. Next story here is OpenAI. You can't have a rundown of all the main stories in 2024 without mentioning this company that's just sort of created probably the hottest company in 2023. And here it is again on a just sort of storm in 2024. But we singled out sort of the unveiling of, is it 01? 01, I think. Yeah. This extra model. I think, when did they announce that? Oh, back in September. This is a little bit different, the way that it works. So up to the launch of this product, to improve the models, they had just basically been expanding the sort of context window, the amount of information it could take in and sort of digest at any one time. And this one works in a bit of a different way, in that it can think more deeply. Up until that point, a bit like sort of Google search, the speed of response was critical. Right? You would type something in and it would be measuring. You remember when Google used to sort of say, hey, this result came in this amount of time. It would want to reply really quickly. And that was the measure of success. Now this with O1 is much more sort of thinking and then checking its results and then iterating to kind of go, have I really got that right? What other questions should I ask myself? So a different way of thinking, I think, for most of us day to day. The applications of that, I don't know. This is supposed to be good for specific math problems. And, so people who use ChatGPT to create content or shorten content or in their day-to-day marketing work, maybe. But we feel like this was a big step forward in AI capabilities for 2024.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of content, I've seen it where it now says editing, almost like I'm thinking, give me a sec. And it takes a little while. It used to be you asked it something or you gave it a blog post and said, give me 5 titles. And in a nanosecond, everything popped up. And now there's a little bit of a pause where it is you can tell it is thinking a bit more. That's a good thing, considering we were wondering where some of these AI outputs were coming from. I think it was not that long ago, we were seeing AI referencing The Onion as sources and telling people to eat rocks. So I think we've come a long way from there, but it's interesting to see what this will do. I personally wouldn't rely on it solely without doing some fact checking of my own, no matter what kind of model they introduce. But it's a big step forward. We're not eating rocks anymore.
Do you think it's got better when, like, just in that very simple use case, hey, give me some headlines for this, what this blog post is thinking more deeply? Is the output better?
It is, from what I've seen. It's less cookie cutter. You used to see the same kind of phrasing, and there were just telltale signs like, okay, this doesn't work because this sounds like ChatGPT. There's a little less of that, I would say. You're still going to have it pop out in today's ever-changing landscape as it starts out pretty much every paragraph. But I think it has gotten a little bit better. I think it has actually given a little bit more thought to things.
It's taken a big step up. Now, I haven't seen how that changes in terms of the output, to Morgan's point and yours around, is it becoming a better writer? But it's definitely a better thinker, right? Like, I feel like the first versions was like talking to somebody at a party who can hardly hear you. And then they just, yeah, the thing we're talking about is this. And here's the thing I know about that, rather than sort of really engaging you with you. And I feel like now the answers like show that it's not, again, just trying to come up with something conversational, but trying to solve the logic of your situation. To give an example, I've been trying to put together a new stereo for a while, and I'm trying to understand this like world of what could be a lot of just sort of nonsense tech gibberish. But there are certain things that are knowable, right? Like how you set up your speakers and whether things are compatible with one another. And when I asked the old model questions like that, it seemed to just do very casual, or I should say top level searches of certain domains to try to get the answers. Whereas now it's talking back at me like I'm an audiophile, and I'm actually having to go, okay, what does this mean? And get more explanation for it. And that's a very complex buying process, buying a hi-fi stereo, right? There's a lot of choices. There's a lot of factors. And I've been impressed by how it has helped me narrow it and really help me understand the space rather than just tell me what the brands are saying, which is, I think, what happened before.
I have a thought for you. I saw recently a PR commentator suggesting that, hey, in your media strategy, you should go for coverage in publications that are not at war with ChatGPT, that have allowed their content to be crawled so that it could be ingested into those results, right? And you should be carefully targeting publications like that and not the New York Times and Wirecutter, for example. So in your use case, it would only surface reviews of sites that are being crawled by ChatGPT. Do you think that this is just overthinking a PR strategy, particularly for startup, like the second order impact of the article being ingested into ChatGPT and then getting extra reviews rather than the direct views or the ones that you've shared of an article? Should this be an input into your PR strategy?
I mean, to the extent that we can figure out how, absolutely. It's no different than looking at when we started into social and looking at which articles end up getting tweeted more in this other channel, right? It's no different than looking at how people use your website based on the content that they see out there. So I think it absolutely should be part of it. Also, I'm not looking forward to every client asking, how do you get me onto ChatGPT? Because I don't know the answer yet. We have found that Firebrand itself and our marketing materials have made their way into the platform. Maybe it's because it's truly excellent. Maybe it's because we are open to it. We're not blocking any form of content collectors. But I do think that is going to become a bigger and bigger question. I've noticed that in the Google results, the AI answers are not very accurate often. And so that is going to become a question of why isn't Google's as smart as OpenAI's for search, and really start to move that forward. But yeah, When I was referring to O1's superiority, it was more on educating me versus comparison shopping, right? It was using websites that are known audiophile sources to talk about theory, right? And if you think about that level of education, right now we do a lot of that for our brands because we're rewarded by SEO to do so, right? We're rewarded by the search engines to do so. We need to find a way to get into these models because this is a way around going to our website and looking at what we have to say. What comes first, the chicken or the egg here? I think it's the egg. I think we've got to keep laying all these eggs until the new chicken comes along.
I think that our focus here on the O1 model is in some sense a placeholder for a couple of big stories. It's a way into a couple of big stories that one that is the talk of Silicon Valley and the other that I think is sort of percolating under the surface. Now, the one that everyone agrees on is that agentic AI is the catchphrase, especially for AI startups going into 2025. We hear from clients who are going to conventions, conferences, investment conferences, just across the board. Everyone is fascinated with this idea of the next step in generative AI being AI that can not only answer your questions, but go out and take action in the digital world to answer those questions more accurately and effectively, right? You could see little pieces of this emerging, partly like with O1, you have a model that is better at step-by-step reasoning. So coming to one conclusion, just in a very simplified and possibly slightly inaccurate way, coming to one conclusion, using that to reach the next conclusion and like step-by-step methodically building out a larger response from smaller pieces, right? So that's one part of it. But another important development this year was the integration of web search into these chatbot models interactions with the user, meaning that if you can actively select on ChatGPT, I want you to refer to the web in giving me an answer to this question. And my sense is that it runs a web search behind the scenes, collects the results, and uses those to frame its answer. And sometimes, even if you turn that off, it does it anyway. This brings me to the second development that I think is percolating underneath, which is the emergence of a real killer use case for generative AI, which honestly, for all the hype around it and all that we've talked about it, I don't know that a killer use case for generative AI has really emerged because it's just not reliable enough. You can't depend on it. Like, it does amazing things. If you take it at face value, it's plagiarism. If you're using it to write, there are copyright implications and you wouldn't use it as work product in most cases. You wouldn't depend on it to do math, to manipulate a spreadsheet. It requires too much nannying to be useful for most things. But the one thing outside of coding, I know that it provides a clear and easily accessed increase in productivity is summarization. I don't think it's any coincidence that so many of the more successful AI-powered applications are one form or another of conversation summary. Zoom summarizing your conference, your Otter doing speech to text more and more accurately and summarizing that conversation. We are gradually seeing the emergence of an evolved form of web search, embodied most famously in Perplexity, in startup Perplexity, as the more probable killer use case for the average person. A tool that will not, how many of us, like, to take your case, Ian, I too, if I'm working on my PC and I run into a problem, I will just type my problem into Google with the expectation that somebody out there has had that problem and discussed it on Reddit or on some specialist message board. And I'm more or less asking Google to point me to the discussion of that problem. But the next step, anyone who's done this knows that it's a pretty inefficient way to go about answering a question. Sometimes you get exactly what you need. Other times you need to just troll through any number of message boards to hopefully find the answer you're looking for. If you had an agent that could go out and troll the web for you, figure out what was the conventional wisdom, and present that back to you. That's really powerful. And it's not a big leap from there to the classic agentic AI use cases of plan my vacation for me. I was curious to see if ChatGPT could recommend, or even Amazon's AI could recommend good books for someone who liked this particular book and fit this demographic. I'm doing my Christmas shopping earlier and trying just to see. And it was useless, really. It could give me genres. It could say that someone who fits this description might like books in this genre, but it wasn't able to go out and read reviews and make conclusions based on those reviews. I think we're really close to something that can do that. And I have a feeling, especially when you look at how ChatGPT is now, or something like ChatGPT is now integrated into Windows. Now we have Apple Intelligence. It's going to be at everyone's fingertips pretty soon. Some combination of web search and agentic AI, I think, is going to be the tipping point for mass adoption of this technology.
We're looking often at AI in this sort of vertical way, but it's going to be horizontally integrated across software. It's going to be working with other existing large models. Like what you're describing is, man, wouldn't it be great if there's a Netflix for books? There's a Netflix for something, so there's no question that there will be that same kind of using a knowledge graph in combination with new AI tools, in combination with search to come up with something that does what you're describing. Very exciting to think about. And I guess my approach to how do you inform all of them, it still comes back to like have the knowledge, share the knowledge, be included in all of those forms. And then when you have very specialized knowledge or a way of organizing it, think about how your organization is going to integrate that from a technology point of view. The stuff that's conversational, you got to share, right? But then your secret sauce is is sort of a different thing.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing more startups orient their messaging towards agentic AI, look for SEO around agentic AI terms, try to define that because I still think it's a little bit like, what is an agentic architecture? What does that really mean? What's the difference with a traditional Gen AI? So just in a sort of practical sense, this is definitely going to be a theme in messaging on websites, in content. Our next story here is the interpublic acquisition by Omnicom, creating the world's largest marketing business. That's a recent story, December the 9th. We talked about this last week. Why is it on the list? Because it is the biggest deal, I think, in recent agency history, and it won't close until 2025. So we're likely to see more from that. I think sort of thematically, the agencies sort of combining and merging together in order to find a sustainable business model and maintain their profit margins in the face of competition from big tech is likely to continue. If these guys are doing it, we're probably going to see more M&A in the marketing space in 2025.
I think it's a sign that independent agencies like us have an advantage that they're recognizing. Certainly, it's a reaction to the biggest tech companies in the world, but they know we're the ones that are leveraging all those technologies that are giving us the ability to show scale and to do the things that brands couldn't do before. Just the phone has changed. The smartphone has changed who can take video, who can create audio content and all that in ways that even the best directors in the world are taking note of, right? That's what's happening to marketing. And by the time these big guys, in my opinion, by the time these big guys figure out what works, what does it, what technologies matter, which ones are past already, it will have shifted again. And so I think it's a huge advantage to the nimble, to the young, and to the tech forward.
Yeah, they're doing it to become more agile, but you're still an agile $25 billion company, which is to say not very agile. So I think that's a great point. And also, just look, brands of all sizes are getting far more comfortable working with boutique firms who are specialists in their area, the best in the world, and who play nice with other firms and know that, stay in their lane and can collaborate, people are working from home. They don't need to come into the agency's glitzy offices and pay for all that stuff. They just want to get the work done and be efficient. This year in marketing was the year of efficiency. We found it in our Startup Marketer Outlook how much people were focused on efficiency, and who's efficient, more nimble, smaller, more integrated agencies, not the old guard. And so I think we'll see them clubbing together again, more sort of leaning against each other to try and sort of save themselves next year. But big agency writ large, definitely in trouble at the moment as a model. Now, there are large organizations that can really only interact with other large agencies. I keep saying, but like if you're United Airlines, you can only choose a few big companies that are not conflicted and have the scale to deal with all the stuff that you need to get done. So is big agency going to go away? No, but they might get smaller and they'll still struggle. And I think that means that for smaller agencies, there's a big opportunity. There's a big opportunity. Our last story here, just as we wrap, Nicole, is the TikTok ban. Back in April, the 23rd, Congress passed the bill that could ban TikTok. The headline here in the New York Times says, "Now comes the hard part." And here we are at the hard part. And I think there's sort of stories emerging about the Supreme Court even taking up this case.
I said last week there would be a few more Hail Marys, and we saw one with the Supreme Court agreeing to hear the case, which it surprised me. I felt like this was a done deal. So we'll see. But it's almost like this Shakespearean tale at this point. And who knows? It's not like the Supreme Court rules on things on a dime. We're going to be talking about this, for months and months, waiting to see what happens. So it's a very interesting development.
It's true if the Supreme Court doesn't rule on a dime, it's significant that they've, as far as it's possible for them to move quickly, they've expedited our arguments. So I think they're hearing arguments on January 10th, even before the inauguration. Not that's necessarily connected. It just means like about as fast as you could come out on the other side of the holidays. They're going to be hearing this case. So it does suggest that they see a major question to be clarified. At this point, when we're all talking, it's still unclear. There's a lot of speculation about what exactly that question is, whether it's about preserving executive prerogative or about protecting the First Amendment from government encroachment. I think it's going to be fascinating to see how the Supreme Court approaches this. And as you say, Nicole, I think we were all sort of taken aback by their willingness to hear this case. And so it'll have huge implications either way for tech platforms. It's also, it touches on a topic that we've visited on this show, recently, which is just the jockeying for position and the sort of the state of the social media landscape and how that affects marketers. Because with the developments at X, we've seen exoduses of users and journalists among them to other platforms, Blue Sky, and to a lesser extent Threads, at least on the journalist side, lesser extent Threads. But I think the big question for marketers right now on everyone's mind is whether TikTok. I feel, and Nicole, you probably have a better view into this than I do, but it feels to me like marketers were just getting their mind around the idea that maybe they ought to have a TikTok strategy.
Yeah, we've had clients ask about it. Should we be on TikTok? And that is a very recent development. So yeah, to your point, Chris, they're just now dipping their toe in the water, and then there's all of this.
Yeah, I've said before, I banned TikTok in my household, and that ban will not be reviewed by the government. But yeah, the choices are difficult because the bottom line is that there's no reason to believe that the data isn't being leveraged by a foreign government, right? There's not enough assurances to believe that. And you might think, okay, why does that matter? Why is that important? The messages that are on there are filtered. There's an algorithm, and we don't really know much about it. And from what I can tell, it delivers the content that is the most junk food content that it can provide. And maybe that's because people like junk food, right? But I've had to re-explain several concepts to my daughter that she was literally miseducated about not even TikTok, on short form video, because now a lot of these creators post to multiple places. But what becomes popular is seemingly determined, at least in that group, by what goes to the top on TikTok. And geez, if I were a foreign government that didn't want another country to do well, I would certainly want its youth to spend its time focusing on things that don't make it smarter, that maybe give it improper sense of how the world works, and maybe even make them not like each other very much. That would be a really good strategy. And the idea that has sort of fallen away, that this is a propaganda and data monitoring scheme, has sort of fallen away as people have become more and more enamored with the content on TikTok. That's how this conversation started when we were talking about the NDAA 4 or 5 years ago. And national security isn't really as much part of this conversation anymore. It seems to be more about, data sovereignty, a little bit about control of mass media and how much moderation should take place. I'm still worried about the first thing. So that's how I feel about it. We'll see how Mr. Trump feels about it. I know he took a visitor at Mar-a-Lago this week. So, maybe he's feeling a little bit less concerned about that.
The head of TikTok, is who Ian's reporting to. So I think for brands, then this leaves you, okay, maybe if I'm on TikTok, I may be looking to kind of ease up on my investment there because that's uncertain. I may or may not have pulled out of X already. So I'm sort of left with maybe I can start something on Blue Sky. But as Chris said last week, it's a bit Wild West for brands at the moment, like the early days of Reddit, Threads, which has pockets of interest, but probably not a mainstream B2B channel. So you're left with what? LinkedIn. Primarily. I don't know, but it seems to be getting noisier and more self-promoting and less valuable. We've driven millions of dollars of connections through LinkedIn. It's still a great sort of paid channel, but you just look at it now, it's perhaps deteriorating in some senses. That's not a great outlook for social in 2025 until other options come to the fore. And I think strategically, I'm not saying I don't like LinkedIn, I do, but it's not what it used to be, let's just say. But when we think about 2025, focusing on your own channels, focusing on your own content, moving more towards video, that kind of thing feels like the investment and the play for now, so that you can kind of get your own distribution. Then watch this space on channels going forward.
Yeah, it feels to me like across the board, especially as all of these platforms, like setting aside all of the TikTok government drama, all of these platforms are grappling with AI, the impact of AI, and trying to figure out how to incorporate it, whether that's invisibly, algorithmically, or into their user-facing proposition. And it reminds me of how when a pro golfer rebuilds their swing, they go from being, like, say they were an A golfer and they've fallen to be an A minus or a B plus golfer. If they're not an A golfer, they're nothing as far as they're concerned. So they know they need to change their swing, but while they're in the midst of it, and, I remember Tiger Woods went through this famously. They're a C golfer for a while. And I think we're seeing that, in the chaos of Google search results. Everybody comments on how Google search results have deteriorated over the last year. And it feels like every social platform, with the possible exception of Blue Sky, which is trying to be old Twitter, but better, it feels like they're all working out their issues. And so that they're all delivering at best a B plus kind of experience now. So there's no, as you say, Morgan, there's no clear winner, or there's no easy recommendation except to control what you can control, rather than, as we've done over the past years, adopt strategies that try to leverage the reach and impact of external platforms. Those external platforms are not delivering at the moment quite the way that they used to. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be on them at all, but it might not be the time to be all in on them. And maybe it could make more sense to be indexing more on content that you control, self-owned content.
Absolutely. That wraps up all of our key stories for 2024. Join us again next week in the new year, 2025, when we'll be talking about predictions. How do we do in our assessment for 2024? What do we see coming up for 2025? You can join us there and see what we think and agree or disagree. But in the meantime, happy Christmas to you. Hope you had a great time. Happy New Year. We'll see you on the other side in 2025.